We now come to the wind-ups. Joe Swinson.
Thank you very much, Mr Pope. I would like to begin by congratulating the Chair and all the members of the committee for this authoritative and wide-ranging report which we've been debating this afternoon. We've heard many esteemed honourable members today. I think the honourable member for Ilford South opened the debate very well with a summary, as much as you can have a summary of the Middle East, a bit of a rapid tour around all of the various countries involved, but also, of course, crucially giving an update on where we have been since this report was published last July. And it's obviously a part of the world where events do move quickly. The Right Honourable Member for Tonbridge and Malling, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Malling, okay, I can give you some Scottish constituencies to practice with as well, he made an eloquent and passionate contribution about the situation in Gaza in particular. And of course the Honourable Member for Islington North gave a characteristically powerful speech, and I would like to just commend his personal courage and to those others who went to monitor the elections in Gaza when those took place. The Honourable Member for Castle Point made a brief and welcome contribution about minority rights in Egypt and the discrimination against the Baha'i, which of course picked up on the similar religious discrimination point that we heard about earlier with the Christian students, both of which are obviously appalling and definitely need to be on the agenda of our ministers and diplomats in their relations with these countries. I think he also, incidentally, made a very good argument against identity cards in general. The honourable members for Birmingham Northfield and Bolton South East also made excellent contributions on the subject of Gaza. I particularly found interesting the tense exchange, perhaps at times, between the honourable member for Birmingham Erdington and member for Birmingham Northfield. And it brought back to me the opportunity that I had when I visited Israel and Palestine on a fact-finding mission back in 2000. And I found I was just struck that wherever you went, there was just this great fear about security. And it's quite hard to imagine as we walk around our daily lives in the UK, notwithstanding some terrorist attacks that we've obviously had in this country, the atmosphere is just so hugely different. Armed soldiers everywhere, it seemed, which at that point, when I'd not yet been used to armed soldiers in the house, seemed even more shocking. And what I found from that visit was really just the complexity of the situation. We went to the Golan Heights and learned about actually the politics of the water supply, actually speaking to some of the people who were settlers, going to the Palestinian Authority, and of course Jerusalem, which is this focal point for three main religions of the world. And so, I mean, I can well understand the tension and the fear that Israeli citizens and indeed Palestinians have in their daily lives, and it must be atrocious to live with. And I think, in particular, when we note the intensity of the debate that we've had on this particular issue in this chamber today, we can begin to imagine the challenge that there is to get the people involved around the table, where it's not just polarised opinions, but you've got people who have each lost family members, friends, in such terrorist attacks, and to get some kind of reconciliation is obviously going to be immensely difficult, as the last few decades have shown. But I think we do need to retain some optimism, some hope that there can be a peaceful solution, and we can look to the excellent work that's been done by successive governments of different political parties in this country with the situation in Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the success bit by bit that has been achieved in the peace process there. Obviously, we must remain committed to a peaceful resolution of the situation and a two-state solution. And the three quartet principles are incredibly important for everybody to sign up to. Yes.
I'm most grateful to our lady giving way. She mentioned Northern Ireland. I think we've got to be very careful not to read across with the Northern Ireland situation. If we want a peace process, both sides, it seems to me, have got to have a deep desire for peace. And the Northern Ireland process began with a message through unusual channels from the IRA, which more or less said that the war was over and they wanted to negotiate. Now, they'll deny that, but at least there was an intention on their part to enter negotiations. Does she agree with me that at this point in time, it would appear that people like Hamas have no intention of entering such negotiations?
The honourable gentleman makes excellent points, and obviously we need to get to that situation. And obviously the two scenarios are different histories, and one can't generalise that across the two too much. But equally, I think while, as he mentions, there are clearly elements of Hamas who are extreme and obviously will not recognise the right for Israel to exist, for example, I suspect, and I haven't had the advantage of visiting Gaza like some other honourable members here, but I suspect if we took a poll of the people in Gaza, we took a poll of the people in Israel, the ordinary people who are not necessarily making all of these decisions would still have a desire for peace. They may have different views about how that settlement might be arrived at, but I think that's probably the important thing to remember here. And you know, nobody wants to be living in that kind of situation. Honourable gentleman.
To the honourable lady, and I just wonder if she would agree with me that whilst things are now very serious, and all the indications are that some of the more hardline elements in Hamas are now in control in Gaza, there was a massive wasted opportunity in the period 2005-2006 and early 2007, where Hamas, while still not being a different organisation to the one it already had been, was on ceasefire and had offered a long-term truce. And the Northern Ireland experience does tend to indicate that we should have picked that up and seen how far it could be pushed, rather than rejecting it the way the international community did.
Swinson.
The honourable gentleman is quite right, and of course it is vital that when there is movement from either side, that is picked up and that opportunity is taken. And while obviously there is a difficulty with Hamas not recognising the right for Israel to exist, and we must get them to the stage where they do, at the same time, I would agree with the committee's recommendation on this, that not engaging at all with Hamas is actually problematic, and that we do need to get them to the situation where we can have that dialogue. The government does need to engage, as indeed it did over the case of Alan Johnson, which I would congratulate the government's efforts on that issue and situation and getting it right there. I think there's also an issue actually with the quartet, which does not have an Arab representative such as the Arab League, and so perhaps we should be looking at a quintet. And the Honourable Member for Ilford South did point out clearly that the US has traditionally been the key player in the peace process, but actually the US is increasingly seen as give way to Mr. First.
Mr. Howells.
Just to tell her that the quartet works very, very closely with the Arab League, and I'm in constant contact with Amr Moussa, the Secretary General of the Arab League, and we try to conduct initiatives in concert.
I very much welcome that statement from the Minister. The US obviously has been the sort of key lead player in the peace process, but I think we need to recognise the reality the US is not necessarily seen as an honest broker by many Arab nations, in particular in the Middle East, and that has indeed, after the Iraq War, become even more so. And so perhaps it would be instructive to look at alternatives and perhaps having a role for the UN in leading taking the lead in such a process. Interestingly enough, the Minister and I served on the European Standing Committee this week, and I found out much more information which I didn't know before about the Euro-Mediterranean Forum, which seems to be one of the few places where actually we do get the Israelis, the Palestinians and all of the other nations around a table. And obviously it has a much wider remit, but I wonder whether some kind of forum, Israeli-Palestinian Congress, could be set up on an ongoing basis to provide a channel for dialogue in this field. Obviously, the Gaza situation has taken up a great focus of this debate, and I think we have to be absolutely clear that the attacks from Hamas on Israel are entirely unacceptable, as is their denial of Israel's right to exist. But at the same time, we do need to recognise the dire humanitarian situation which has been expressed by many honourable members today. I think the honourable member for Kensington North and Regent's Park talked about the collective punishment, and the right honourable member for Tonbridge and Malling, which I hope I've got right this time, was right to take the headline. It's essentially one big prison. And in fact, the fact that the committee was unable to visit Gaza is just a demonstration of the failures of the international community in terms of being able to respond to this conflict. But I think actually the response by Egypt to the breakthrough of the wall and the people getting basic food and supplies has I think in some ways been quite welcome actually. I say that with a degree of caution, but I think any kind of heavy-handed response would have inflamed the situation. But this obviously just underlines the need for a renewed focus on solving the situation in that troubled part of the world. Turning to Lebanon, I welcome the committee's recommendation, or the committee's point when it says that we conclude that the government's decision not to call for a mutual and immediate cessation of hostilities early on in the Lebanon war has done significant damage to the UK's reputation in much of the world. The committee is quite right, and it's not just the committee that thinks this. The UN Deputy Secretary-General said that the UK's diplomatic efforts at this time were counterproductive, which is surely a damning indictment of our position at that time. And I had hoped the government would take stock and learn from this situation. Sadly, reading the response perhaps suggests otherwise, but perhaps the Minister will comment on that in his response. The Lebanon conflict obviously brought up the issue of cluster munitions, of which 3.5 million were dropped in the 72 hours after the Security Council Resolution 1701. 1 million of these are estimated to be unexploded. I was concerned to read in the committee's report that the work to clear these munitions had been hampered by Israel, and they did well to highlight this, but there seemed to be a bit of a conflict because they said that on the 2nd of July the Israeli ambassador wrote to the committee saying that he'd handed over the maps and that had all been done voluntarily, but that the minister on the 3rd of July had said that he had not had that cooperation. So I'd be interested from the minister to find out what further pressure the government put on Israel after that, and whether it's the minister's view that Israel have not fully cooperated still, or whether that has now been resolved. The government's banning of the dumb cluster munitions has been welcomed by others, and I would add my voice to that. But I can't quite get my head around the so-called smart bombs that still leave 10% of the bombs unexploded. And the government said in its response that it needs to balance military necessity with humanitarian concerns. But how can the government possibly justify continued use of these immoral weapons when it knows that they will kill and maim innocent civilians long after the conflict ends? And I obviously would welcome a signal from the Minister that they're going to ban these too, although I'm not necessarily going to hold my breath on that one today. The committee is undertaking a separate inquiry into Iran, and obviously that will give a more detailed assessment of the security situation there. But I just wanted to make one point on that. Notwithstanding the embarrassing media debacle after the release of the British sailors, I would say the government should be warmly applauded for securing their release, especially as they seem to come to no harm. But I would just like to ask the Minister a related point, which my honourable friend, the member for Teignbridge, has asked of the FCO and not yet received a reply. Did the UK actually also recover the naval vessel from the Iranians, and if not, is that an issue they will be pursuing? In the short period of time I've left, I would just like to turn to the issue of Iraq, where there's not been much discussion today, but I think it is actually very relevant to the Israeli-Palestinian situation, particularly because the war in Iraq diverted so much energy and attention from dealing with the Israel-Palestine situation. And others have mentioned missed opportunities there have been in the past few years. I wasn't in the House in 2003 when the votes and the debates took place. I was in fact marching on the streets of Glasgow in protest at the Iraq war with 50,000 others. It was an illegal war on a flawed prospectus, and just this week the Information Commissioner Tribunal have said the government should publish a secret document which was drawn up by the FCO's top spin doctor at the time, John Williams, and is seen that it may have possibly influenced the dodgy sexed-up dossier that we knew so much about. They, in their ruling, said information has been placed before us which was not before Lord Hutton, which may lead to questions as to whether the Williams draft in fact played a greater part in influencing the drafting of the dossier than has previously been supposed. I very much hope the government will now respect the Information Tribunal ruling and agree to publish this report. In conclusion, Mr Pope, I would just like to say that this has been a valuable report and an excellent debate this afternoon. Pay tribute again to the work of the committee in undertaking the inquiry and raising a range of important issues, and I very much look forward to the Minister's reply.